This is ABC 7 Extra.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to ABC 7 Extra. I'm Mark Ross. April 1st marked the second anniversary of the state of New Mexico allowing the sale of legal, medical, and recreational marijuana. Data released by the New Mexico Regulation and Licensing Department shows total cannabis sales statewide reaching over $1.1 billion through April 30th of this year. Of that total, $756 million is adult use sales across 17.5 million transactions. Medical use sales are more than $357 million across 7 million transactions. 12% state tax and, of course, city sales tax is added to every purchase. That's led to $75 million in tax revenue added to the state of New Mexico's general fund. That's according to a statement released in March by Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham's office. Closer to home, Las Cruces has had total sales since April 1st, 2022 of over $80 million, putting them second behind Albuquerque. Sunland Park has the fourth highest sales total of nearly $71 million. And it's no secret that many of those sales are to people from Texas, where recreational marijuana is still not legal. ABC 7's Isabella Martinez recently took a look at the cannabis boom in Sunland Park.
What we are seeing is additional revenues within the municipality. So that has given us a little bit of more freedom to provide additional services.
Mayor Javier Perea says the cannabis industry in Sunland Park is not only bringing in overall revenue, but also revitalizing empty spots, contributing to construction and tax income.
This industry has taken over some of the vacant buildings that have been vacant throughout many years. The cannabis industry for us is just a small component of actually a much bigger vision that we have for the community.
Meanwhile, at our Greenleaf, the manager Ricardo Martinez, who did not want to appear on camera, discusses the challenges within the local markets.
It's not just necessarily competition, it's just that at this point I would say that it's saturated with dispensaries.
Sunland Park currently has 27 dispensaries open, most of them within a 1-mile radius. However, despite these challenges, Martinez says they are committed to serving the community.
A lot of behind the scenes as well that is getting employees in as well. We have marketing, we have shipment, we have packaging.
As sales continue to climb, Sunland Park is a key player in the state's cannabis industry.
And I would have to say the way things are going, we will surpass Albuquerque.
And that was ABC 7's Isabella Martinez reporting. Joining me now, the mayor of Sunland Park, New Mexico, Javier Perea, and the executive director of the New Mexico Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, Ben Lewinger. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Mayor Perea, let's start with you. Your town's certainly benefiting from the sale of cannabis. Can you give me a rough estimate of how much of the tax revenue Sunland Park has received from the state since cannabis sales began in 2022?
So we've received up to this point about 1.2. We're going to be forecasting maybe 1.5 to $2 million this fiscal year if things pan out the way we think they will. So that's a lot more than we were anticipating as the industry continues to grow. So that's something very positive for us.
So how have you been able to make use of some of that tax revenue?
So the first year we kind of banked that money to get a feel for how the industry was going to pan out. But we actually have been able, because of that and our improved revenues overall in the community, we're actually able to afford pay raises for police and fire. We're adding additional personnel to public works, to our finance department as well, IT. So we're doing improvements across the entire city with the help of the cannabis revenues.
Now, in Isabella's story, she says there are 27 retail businesses in Sunland Park selling cannabis. I know competition's a good thing, but is there such a thing as too many dispensaries in a town, especially with a population of just over 17,000?
Well, I think if we just look at it from that perspective, that might be a little too much. But when you look at it as the overall region, the borderland region, and the area that we serve, I mean, we're still less than what Albuquerque has. And actually, the entire metropolitan area, including Juarez, is much bigger than the entire state of New Mexico. So I think that's one important thing to realize when we look at these statistics. It's not just Sunland Park. There's El Paso, there's Juarez, and people that come in from Mexico. So it's a big opportunity that we have available in a little niche that we've been able to acquire because of the legalization of cannabis.
Mr. Lewinger, tell us about the New Mexico Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. How long have you been in existence?
We've been in existence since 2018. So our organization started when we only had a medical cannabis program. And believe it or not, for the first year, our organization was not supportive of legalizing. And then by 2020, we really helped to lead the charge to establish an adult use program in New Mexico the right way. And, there's a lot of conversations about saturation. And I think that's the result of one of the hallmarks of how New Mexico legalized cannabis by removing barriers to entry, making it possible so that everybody could get a license. And I do expect there to be some equilibrium and some dispensaries to close, and they're not always to be 27 dispensaries, but that's the benefit of how we legalized, where every single person who wanted to be involved in this industry got their shot to open a business.
Now, there are over 1,000 cannabis retailers in the state. How many of them are members, and what does your organization do for them?
Our organization really focuses on supporting the industry from a policy perspective. So we help the state, we help the Cannabis Control Division to get honest feedback, to really have a unified voice from the industry so that the rulemaking and the laws that pass in Santa Fe are rightly tuned to make sure that this industry has the best chance of thriving in an equitable way. Right now, I think we have about 200 members. And those 1,000 retail locations, those are just locations. So there are several businesses that have, multiple storefronts across the state.
So you are acting as an advocate for your members with the New Mexico legislature.
Correct. We're helping to unify the voice. We're helping to professionalize this industry and mature it as quickly as possible.
All right. We will continue our discussion on cannabis sales in New Mexico with our guests when we return. You're watching ABC 7 Extra Sunday.
Is your financial house ready for life? At Dodds Wealth Management Group, we want to help you answer that question. With our complimentary second opinion solution, we evaluate your current portfolio to ensure there are no surprises in your financial future.
We are fiduciary asset managers obligated to act in your best interest. We invite you to give us a call today. Dodds Wealth Management Group, your neighbors in building, creating, and preserving wealth.
There's DNA. Then there's heavy-duty DNA. HDNA. It's engineered into every aspect of the GMC Sierra HD. With the pulling power to prove it. Tow hitches of the world, prepare for glory. New 2024 Sierra heavy-duty models arriving weekly. Stop by your GMC dealer to make your selection. See your El Paso Las Cruces GMC dealers.
El Paso Emergency Room is the place you can trust when emergency strikes. Board-certified physicians will help ease your trauma, and you'll never wait. That's our promise. El Pasoans caring for El Pasoans. El Paso Emergency Room, 2 locations east and west.
Has acne taken away your confidence? At Waterfall Spa, our Face Reality Acne program will give you amazing results in very little time. Let us help you love the skin you're in. Start today. Waterfall Spa, where you always come first. Call now for your consultation.
Winter's gone, and it's time to get back to doing. At El Paso Tool Rental, we've got all of the landscaping tools you need to get the job done right. Tillers, chainsaws, compactors, post hole diggers, and so much more. We've got earth-moving equipment like mini excavators, skid steers, and trenchers. So spring into summer and get going on that yard you've always dreamed of. 2 locations, northeast at Dyer and Angora Loop, and central at Airport and Boeing. El Paso Tool Rental, the best place to rent tools in El Paso.
Welcome back to ABC 7 Extra Sunday Edition. I'm Mark Ross. We are discussing cannabis sales in New Mexico 2 years after legal sales for recreational and medicinal use began. I'm joined by Mayor Javier Perea of Sunland Park and Ben Lewinger, the Executive Director of the New Mexico Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Lewinger, are prices for cannabis set by each individual retailer?
They are, and as our industry matures and as we start to quell and put the illicit market down, then we'll see those prices also stabilize. And the goal is to have every operator be able to pay for employees and be able to make a fair wage based on the products that they produce or manufacture.
Would you know how much a typical customer would spend in one transaction on average?
I think the average transaction across the state is between $50 and $70, and that is that's different depending on where they are. Right, in more rural parts of the state, folks don't visit the dispensary as often, so it has a much higher cart. Whereas places like Albuquerque or Las Cruces City Center, people may visit a dispensary every week or every time they get paid, so the price may be a little bit lower. But it's around $50 to $70 every purchase.
Mayor Perea, as I mentioned at the top of the show, it's no secret many of the customers of dispensaries in Sunland Park and Las Cruces probably are coming from Texas and from El Paso primarily. In fact, one retailer was quoted as saying 80% of his business comes from Texas. What's your reaction?
You know, it's very unique to be in this particular part of the state. But it's nothing new. This has happened across the United States, in the states where it has been legalized and the states that are not legalized. Even before New Mexico legalized it, I mean, a lot of New Mexicans went to Trinidad, Colorado to make their purchases up there. It was a small town that saw a big boom because of the economic or the cannabis industry. So it's nothing unique. You know, for example, also, I mean, we have legal gambling in New Mexico, and it's not legal in Texas. So we have a casino here within the city of Sunland Park. It's just because of the different state statutes, it puts us in a very unique situation, and we are lucky to take advantage of that opportunity.
Would you say that the New Mexico legislature has been a little more visionary about all of this?
I think to a certain degree, but I also appreciate that, you know, they allowed some states to do it first to learn some lessons from other individuals or other states. You know, removing some of the obstacles for opening a business, I think it has been beneficial. And I think one of the reasons why we see so many businesses within the city of Sunland Park. So that has been, I think, a great opportunity for us.
Mr. Lewinger, with all of the people coming from Texas to buy marijuana in New Mexico, it's still illegal to possess it in Texas, so customers from Texas are simply flaunting the law, right?
Well, ideally, we'd love for those folks from Texas to come to New Mexico and to stay here to enjoy their legal cannabis, to stay in hotels, to enjoy activities that are in New Mexico. Folks who are driving cannabis back across the border, I'm not Pollyannish. I'm certain that that's happening, but that is against the law currently. Of course, there's a big federal discussion right now about decriminalizing or descheduling or even rescheduling cannabis to Schedule III. So we know that the vast majority of voting Americans across the country now support legal cannabis. We know that most people in the country live someplace where there is legal cannabis, whether it's a medical or adult use program. So these state borders between legal and non-legal states, I think that there won't be a lot of difference between what's happening on either side of the border in the next few years.
And Mr. Lewinger, can you expand for a moment on the Schedule 1 and Schedule 3? And of course, marijuana right now it's Schedule 1 according to the Food and Drug Administration. Talk about that. Go into a little more detail about what may happen down the road.
Yeah, so the Controlled Substances Act, which passed under President Nixon, scheduled marijuana as Schedule 1, which means it has no medical benefit and a high risk for abuse. And New Mexico had the very first medical cannabis program less than a decade after the Controlled Substances Act passed. So we've long known that cannabis is in fact a product that has medicinal benefits for many people, whether it's people who need help with sleeping, whether it's people who are dealing with anxiety or stress, all the way up to people who are on drugs for cancer and chemotherapy and the benefits that it provides for those folks. So what's happening now is Health and Human Services has asked the Drug Enforcement Agency to reschedule from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, which is another pharmaceutical schedule. So it's in the same category as Tylenol with codeine, Klonopin, and other drugs. And it would basically apply a pharmaceutical model to cannabis, which personally, I would much prefer to see descheduling completely, treat cannabis more akin to alcohol or to tobacco. And again, that's what the majority of Americans want. And there is a small contingent of senators in Congress who are pushing for descheduling. But we know that rescheduling is definitely on the docket. The DEA has accepted this, and we should see that to start to move in the next few months. And in as early as maybe a year and a half, 2 years, have cannabis Schedule 3 instead of Schedule 1, which would allow for interstate commerce like other pharmaceutical drugs.
Now, Mayor Perea, Mr. Lewinger mentioned the fact that he had hoped that people who buy marijuana, or cannabis, we should say, excuse me, in New Mexico would stay in New Mexico to enjoy the product. So what has it come to now with the Sunland Park Police Department, New Mexico State Police? Are you all monitoring some of these cannabis businesses that are right there close to the Texas-New Mexico border? What's going on with that?
Enforcement's pretty much done by state authorities on the cannabis industry. Unfortunately, right now, we're not as developed of keeping people here within the city of Sunland Park. Like I mentioned in the report, the idea is to, have cannabis as a small component of a much bigger picture, much bigger vision. And that's economic development, new hotels, new restaurants, new places where people can enjoy the community. But I mean, we are limited as to the type of enforcement that we can do within the state of New Mexico. Just because you have cannabis on you, that doesn't make it a crime in New Mexico. So there's not a lot more that we can do when it comes to additional enforcement.
Mayor Javier Perea of Sunland Park, New Mexico, Ben Lewinger with the New Mexico Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. Gentlemen, thank you for being on ABC 7 Extra.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Still ahead, will Texas ever follow New Mexico's lead and allow for the legal sale of marijuana? What one member of El Paso's delegation to Austin had to say in a recent interview. Stay with us. You're watching ABC 7 Extra Sunday.
There are trucks, and then there's the GMC Sierra, available with the connected driving experience and the world's first 6-function multi-pro tailgate. GMC Sierra. It's the truck. Get over $2,700 purchase cash on select 2024 Sierra 1500 Denali models. Plus, current eligible GMC owners get an additional $2,000 purchase allowance.
See your El Paso Las Cruces GMC dealers.
Hello, my name is Dr. Carlos Viesca with Border Pain Institute, and I would like to introduce you to the new FDA-approved Intracept procedure, which is 90 to 95% successful in treating low back pain. This revolutionary procedure is minimally invasive with a very short recovery time that will help you regain functionality and get you back to the normal activities that bring joy to your life. If you or someone you know is suffering from chronic pain, give us a call to discuss your options.
Watch Smart Money Thursday on ABC 7 at 4 with Myro Capital Management. You'll learn how to save money the right way and make better decisions to set you and your family up for financial success. Smart Money Thursday on ABC 7 at 4, sponsored by Myro Capital Management.
We've never spoken, but you've told us many things. You told us you love stargazing, almost as much as you hate parallel parking. That heavy right foot of yours? We got you. The Lexus ES didn't begin in a studio, it began with you.
Lease the 2024 ES350 for $519 a month for 36 months.
Can't get to a TV? Stay up to date and watch every ABC 7 newscast wherever you are. Complete coverage of breaking news and accurate, reliable storm track weather streaming live on KVIA.com and the free KVIA News app.
Welcome back to ABC 7 Extra Sunday Edition. I'm Mark Ross. I'm joined now by State Representative for District 78, Joe Moody, who has been a longtime advocate of lowering penalties for possessing marijuana in Texas. Representative Moody, let's go back to 2019 when you authored legislation that would have made possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana a Class C misdemeanor instead of a Class B misdemeanor. Your fellow members in the House supported it, but it died in the Senate. Did you speak to senators about the legislation, and why were they against it?
Yeah, back then we had multiple conversations with our counterparts in the Senate that work on criminal justice issues. Ultimately, there was a reticence to move that penalty reduction forward. At the same time, we had conversations with the governor's office, and in fact, some of the changes that we presented in that bill during the House floor debate were based on the conversations with the governor's office. They stated to us, if this lands on our desk, we certainly don't want to be in the business of vetoing it, but we want it in a form that the governor could sign or could allow to pass into law. So The bill that the bill that we sent to the Senate was one. I don't want to speak for the governor's office, but was one that we worked in conjunction with their policy team on making sure that it addressed any concerns that they had. So the Senate has been reluctant to do a lot, not just in this arena, but many arenas related to criminal justice reform. I think that's an unfortunate position to take, and they seem to continue to take that path. In fact, some of the current charges that are being looked at pursuant to the lieutenant governor's request would actually take us backwards. I think that is certainly the wrong policy direction, but that's part of the legislative process. You've got a House and a Senate, and they may have different approaches to these issues, but this is one that I think is fairly straightforward, and my hope is we'll continue to have a productive discussion around that.
And you recently mentioned Lieutenant Governor Patrick had asked the State Senate Affairs Committee to study a potential ban in Texas of products with Delta 8 and Delta 9. Those are derived from hemp and can produce effects similar to cannabis. Aren't these products already legal in the state?
I think there's a gray area there. And I think that's what they're trying to ferret out. I mean, the net effect, whether you and I would agree that they're legal or illegal, the laws, again, if they were illegal, no one is enforcing it. It is not something that people are utilizing scarce criminal justice resources to enforce. And so, the net effect of the way things are in the real world is it is de facto legal because no one is enforcing these laws.
Now, the Biden administration wants to reclassify marijuana from a Schedule I narcotic to Schedule III, meaning it has accepted medical use and may be lawfully dispensed by prescription. Should that reclassification take place, would that be any kind of an incentive for the state of Texas to reconsider its stance on cannabis?
Well, I certainly think that it should be a part of our conversation. This is a continuing change in the landscape of how cannabis is viewed, right? You're going to have, for those states, and look, we're right next door to New Mexico that has a retail and a medical market. That rescheduling is going to change things for them. Won't legalize their markets, but it will change things for them. You'll have some certain tax credits that those businesses can engage in. Research into cannabis could be a little bit more expansive because, as you said, rescheduling from 1 to 3 means that we are accepting there is a medical use here. So we have the ability then to explore that further. So I think where it finds itself in the discussion in Texas is we do have a very limited medical program called the Texas Compassionate Use Program. And like I said, it is very limited. And there have been a bipartisan group of members that have promoted the idea of continuing to expand that effort. And so maybe where this fits in our discussion is, well, let's do some research if we want to expand medical uses of cannabis in Texas, where I think is probably the most likely space that Texas will find itself in. Then rescheduling from 1 to 3 could influence those decisions. It wouldn't make, if we flip the switch on a more expanded medical program tomorrow, it wouldn't make that program more legal than it would be today. But it would change. It certainly changes the landscape of the conversation.
So would you say that Governor Abbott and the Republican lawmakers are ignoring the cash cow that cannabis has become in New Mexico and Arizona and in a number of other states?
Well, if you look at every state around us, there is, Oklahoma has access to medical cannabis program, Arkansas, the same, Louisiana, the same, New Mexico has a retail and a medical market. So we are surrounded by states on every border that have some access to cannabis. And we really have stood still in this discussion, which I think is really the wrong policy direction. Nationally, you've got 4/5 of the states that have some sort of access to either medical cannabis or a retail market. So unlike when this first started in Colorado and Washington, this is no longer an experiment. This is a business, and a very big business. And so for a state like ours, which we claim to be open for business and pro-business, we're ignoring what I think is a very productive business that, if done correctly, if regulated properly, could have a huge benefit to not just the revenue that it brings to the state, but also to advancing business in our state and giving people options, particularly when you talk about a medical market, giving people options on different types of treatments that they can receive, whether that's as part of their cancer care or some other ailment. These are all things that I think we should explore for the betterment of Texas.
So a recent Pew Research poll says only 4 out of 10 Republicans said they believe marijuana should be legalized. Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Patrick say they're simply representing their constituents. So what is your response to that?
Well, I do think that a full retail market is one that Texas will not go forward with. I don't think you will see something like that based on the current political makeup. I do believe, and I think the governor has talked about this on the record, the governor has talked about reducing penalties on the criminal side of things, and that's one lane we can work on reforms. And the governor, I think, has made it clear that if there is a tangible medical benefit to certain uses of cannabis, he's not opposed to those. I've heard that from him directly. We continue to face an uphill battle in the Senate where I don't think they're engaging in a productive conversation. My hope would be that representing your constituents means that you should at least have a robust discussion around expanding the medical use of cannabis in the state of Texas, and also let's look at reducing the penalties for cannabis. We're really backwards in Texas when it comes to that. When we have legal access in the states that surround us, but we have done nothing on the criminal justice front, and we have done very little in terms of medical access, that puts us now as an outlier. Used to be that we were in the majority of states that didn't dabble in that policy, but now we're not. Now we're in the minority that aren't trying to do this for their constituents. So I do think we're turning a blind eye in a lot of ways, and my hope is that discussions like this at the federal level. In addition to that, there is a significant discussion at the federal level to pass the Safer Banking Act. We've heard about the struggles that these businesses have accessing financial services, and so the Safer Banking Act is one that's passed the House several times, and Leader Schumer has now said that he's going to bring that bill forward before the end of this term for a vote in the Senate for the first time ever. So those things continue to create critical mass around reforms, and Texas should be a part of that conversation. This is a huge...
State Representative Joe Moody, have to cut you off there. We are out of time. State Representative Joe Moody of El Paso, thank you for coming on ABC 7 Extra Sunday.
Thank you.
And that is our show for this week. I'm Mark Ross. Stay safe, stay strong. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next Sunday night.
Thank you for watching. ABC 7 News is now available on any of these streaming services, as well as the KVIA News and KVIA Weather and Traffic apps.